63 missed calls. That's what it took. 63. I watched them pile up on my phone screen while I sat in the cab of my Peterbilt 579, windows up, air conditioning running, parked in a Novacrest distributor's yard in Henderson, Nevada, where the temperature was climbing toward 114 degrees. The sun was beating down on the hood so hard I could see the heat rippling off the metal like water. The asphalt beneath the truck was softening at the edges, that shimmer of warping pavement that only happens when the earth itself feels the weight of the desert sun. The smell coming in through the ventilation system wasn't stale air conditioning coolant. It was superheated desert, the scent of hot earth and rubber burning just slightly on the asphalt. The quietness was profound. No movement, no activity, just heat and silence and waiting. And I wasn't moving until someone apologized. But that's not where the story starts. My name is Cole Pritchard. I'm 44 years old, and I've been driving 18-wheelers for 19 years. That might not sound like a long time until you do the math. That's roughly 2.3 million miles. 2.3 million. I've logged more hours on U.S. highways than most people have logged hours breathing. I've seen every type of weather, every type of cargo, every type of situation that can happen between a fuel pump and a delivery dock. I've watched the industry change from paper logbooks to electronic monitoring. I've watched fuel prices spike and crash and spike again. I've watched dispatch systems go digital. I've watched a lot of people come and go. But I stayed. I'm not an employee. I own Pritchard Freight Solutions. Just me, one part-time driver who handles overflow during peak season, and a custom Peterbilt 579 that cost me more than most people's houses and handles like she's worth every penny of it. That truck is my investment, my reputation, and my livelihood all rolled into one 800-horsepower machine. I took out a business loan to buy her. I worked a side job for the first 3 years I owned her just to make the payments. I know her maintenance schedule better than I know my own birthday. I can diagnose a problem just by the sound of the engine. See, there are truck drivers, and then there are drivers like me. The difference isn't just ego. It's that I invested in equipment and certifications that matter. My rig has pharmaceutical-grade temperature control. It's got biometric-linked monitoring systems that track the internal environment down to the decimal point. I mean fractional digits. That system can detect a 1-degree fluctuation in a 600 cubic foot cargo area. My safety record with the Department of Transportation is spotless. Clean inspection, clean logbook, no violations in 8 years. I'm FDA certified to haul perishables under cold chain compliance standards. That certification required 40 hours of study, a proctored exam, and ongoing training every 18 months. I've studied federal regulations. I've paid for training. I've maintained certifications that most people in this industry don't even know exist. I invested $8,000 to have the biometric temperature system installed. $8,000. That's money that comes out of my gross revenue, not from some company's capital budget. That's money I had to justify to the banks, convince them was a worthwhile investment in my business. And it was. That system has saved countless shipments and kept my reputation spotless for years. I've hauled fresh produce for Whole Foods regional distribution, which means produce that's going to restaurants and stores across a 4-state region. I've moved dairy shipments for high-end restaurant chains in San Francisco and Los Angeles, places where the clientele can taste the difference between milk that's been held at 39 degrees versus milk that's been held at 42 degrees. I've transported specialty cargo for private events, the kind of events where you're not just delivering food, you're delivering someone's vision for their wedding or their corporate retreat. I've driven through ice storms and sandstorms and thunderstorms that made visibility near zero. I've pulled off the road when conditions were unsafe, even when it meant missing a delivery window, because I'd rather be late than be part of an accident statistic. I don't just drive, I hold people's supply chains together. I'm part of the reason that restaurants can serve fresh ingredients, that casinos can plan opening nights with confidence, that families get food on their tables, and I know the law better than some lawyers do. That last part, knowing the law, that's what mattered on this particular Thursday in April. The job came through a freight broker I've worked with for 6 years. Novacrest Distributors, mid-size food distribution company based out of Henderson. They supply the casino resort properties here in Vegas. We're talking high-end restaurants, premium buffet programs, the kind of clientele that expects flown-in ingredients and specialty meats from Japan or Denmark or Spain. I'd done 2 smaller runs for them before, no problems. Clean pickups, smooth deliveries, everyone happy. The routes were straightforward. The communication was professional. The payment was reliable. But this load was different. This was consolidation day for the grand opening week at 3 casino properties that had just partnered with Novacrest. 3 new resort restaurants, brand new properties. Opening night dinner service, all 3 locations the same evening. We're talking about specialty produce, heirloom vegetables, hand-selected fruit from California farms, imported European cheeses that had been aged in temperature-controlled warehouses for months, fresh dairy, prepared fine dining ingredients, and fresh proteins that had been assembled specifically for those menus. Everything had to arrive not just on time, but in perfect condition. Not slightly chilled, not adequately cold. Perfect condition. Ready to be prepped by world-class chefs for an opening night that had already been promised to high-paying customers. The cargo was valued at $84 million. You read that right. $84 million. Not a typo, not an exaggeration. Not even rounding up. $84 million. This was a consolidated load that represented months of prearranged orders from 3 different casinos, all timed down to the hour. Miss the delivery window, and you don't just lose a single order. You cascade penalties across 3 separate establishments, each with their own penalty clauses in their contracts. Each with food service operations that are already staffed and ready to prep. Each with opening night reservations that are already sold out. Each with reputation and brand promise on the line. Each with investors watching their bottom line. I knew the stakes walking in. The contract laid it all out. I'd read that contract front to back twice. And I'd studied Section 14 with the kind of attention you reserve for the most important details. Section 4 detailed the cargo value and the importance of timely delivery. Section 6 specified the delivery windows. First drop at Paradise Resort no later than 6 p.m. Second drop at the Venetian Partnership by 11 p.m. Third drop at Caesars by 4 a.m. the next morning. Section 8 covered the penalty clauses, per-hour late fees, chain of custody breaks, temperature log gaps, everything itemized and spelled out in cold legal language. Section 14 covered contractor rights, and that's the section I'd read the most carefully. I read it because I wanted to know exactly what protections existed, what leverage I had if things went wrong, what my options were if someone tried to push me around. I was being proactive, not paranoid. That was when I started driving independently instead of working for other companies. When you own the risk, you own the research that mitigates it. I was ready. I was supposed to pick up at 10 a.m. on Thursday, April 24th. The route would take me east from the Novacrest yard, down to the distribution points starting at 2 p.m. No problem. I've done this distance 100 times. 3-hour drive plus loading time, plenty of buffer. I was at home the night before in Boulder City, went to bed at 9 p.m., woke up at 4:30 a.m. to the sound of my alarm. The desert was still dark at that hour, the temperature starting to climb but not yet oppressive. I got coffee, black, from the machine I'd set up the night before. I checked the forecast. already expected to hit 108 degrees by afternoon, pushing toward 114 by 3 p.m. Check my truck systems by running through the diagnostic protocol I've got memorized. Everything was running clean. The truck had been sitting in my lot overnight. I did a walk around. Tires, lights, hydraulics, fuel tank, window seals, cargo area latches. Every single thing I checked before a big load. Everything was solid. I'd taken the truck in for maintenance 2 weeks prior. Oil change, brake inspection, tire pressure checked and documented. I keep logs. I'm methodical about this. That's not paranoia, that's professionalism. That's what separates the drivers who've been doing this for 19 years from the ones who burn out after 5. I was on the road by 5:15 a.m. for the drive to Henderson. The highway was mostly empty at that hour. That early in the morning, the desert has a different feeling. The heat is dormant. The air actually feels cool if you open the window, which I do sometimes just to feel the real temperature for a moment before the cab cools back down. The radio was on, some morning show talking about basketball, and I was running through the contract in my head. Cargo details, delivery windows, penalty language, Section 14, which covered contractor rights and dispute resolution. I'd read Section 14 probably 10 times before accepting the job. I wanted to know exactly what protections existed. At 7:32 a.m., I got the first traffic alert on my navigation display. Jackknifed semi on I-15 northbound around the Flamingo. 3 vehicles involved. Emergency services responding. The incident was blocking 2 of 3 lanes. Expect delays of up to 3 hours. I called Novacrest Dispatch immediately. That's what you do. You don't wait. You don't assume they'll see the traffic reports. You pick up the phone and you talk to a human being. You document the conversation. You protect yourself. Brenda answered. Dispatcher, probably late 50s. Been doing this job longer than I've been alive. Professional. No nonsense. Competent. The kind of person who actually understands logistics because she's been living logistics for 30 years. I'd worked with her on the previous Novacrest jobs, and I knew her to be reliable and straightforward. Brenda, this is Cole Pritchard with Pritchard Freight. I've got the grand opening consolidation today. There's a multi-vehicle accident on I-15 at the Flamingo. Emergency services are on scene. I'm looking at maybe a 3-hour delay depending on how long they need to clear it and get traffic flowing again. She didn't panic. She didn't get frantic. She just said, "Hold on, I'm pulling up the traffic feed." 30 seconds of silence while I listened to the dispatch background noise. Radio chatter, phone ringing, people talking, the sound of a busy operation managing dozens of moving pieces. Yeah, I see it. Okay, Cole, I'm marking this in the system right now. What's your current ETA for arrival at our facility? I'm about 40 minutes from the backup, so roughly 8:15 a.m. I'll be hitting the delay. If it's 3 hours like these things usually run, I'm looking at a 12:50 p.m. delivery window at your Henderson location. I'll update you if that changes, or if the incident clears faster than expected. Copy. I'm flagging this with logistics. I'm also flagging it with management right now. Everything's documented. Hang tight. Thanks, Brenda. And that was the end of it. I did what you're supposed to do. I gave them a heads up. I documented the holdup in real time. I confirmed the new arrival time. I made it clear that the delay wasn't a failure on my part. It was force majeure, the standard industry term for things outside anybody's control. And at 8:47 a.m., I hit the backup, and I sat there with about 2,000 other vehicles, the desert sun climbing higher in the sky, the inside of my cab staying a comfortable 68 degrees thanks to the temperature control system that I'd invested $8,000 to have installed. I spent the delay listening to an audiobook, something about supply chain optimization, because of course that's what I read in my downtime, and I watched the clock move. The traffic report updated every 15 minutes. The accident was still being cleared. Fire trucks were on scene. One of the vehicles had fluid leaking that required a hazmat team response. Every delay had a reason. By 11:45 a.m., the accident was finally cleared. Traffic started moving again, and I felt the familiar acceleration of the Peterbilt as I pulled out of the backup. I was making good time. I knew I was going to be late. I also knew I'd done everything right, and I had documentation of it. Documentation matters. It's the difference between being protected and being exposed. By 12:50 p.m., I was pulling into the Novacrest yard in Henderson. The yard was a sprawling industrial lot, maybe 3 acres, with a main warehouse building, 2 loading docks, and open space for parking and maneuvering. The heat was visible now, radiating up from the asphalt in waves you could actually see. The metal of the warehouse walls was so hot I wouldn't want to touch it. The few vehicles parked in the lot looked like they were just sitting there waiting out the afternoon. Nobody was moving around. The whole yard had that heat-stunned quality where the smartest thing to do is stay still and wait for evening. And that's when everything changed. Garrett Holloway was waiting for me in the open yard. I didn't know it yet, but I would learn every detail about him by the end of the day. 38 years old, VP of Operations at Novacrest, USC MBA, never driven anything larger than a BMW, wore expensive sneakers that probably cost more than my first truck down payment. The kind that are designed to look casual but are actually statement pieces, and had that particular energy of someone who'd inherited authority without ever having earned it through expertise or hustle or understanding. He was standing near the loading dock with 2 warehouse staffers, guys in blue shirts with Novacrest logos, experienced-looking guys who actually understood what they were doing, guys who'd probably been loading trucks since before Garrett had his MBA. Arms crossed, expression already set in displeasure. He was looking at his watch like it might tell him something other than what it was telling him. I parked the Peterbilt, locked her down, ran through the shutdown sequence, and walked over. The heat hit me like a physical thing when I stepped out of the cab. That dry desert heat that makes your skin feel like it's pulling tight. My shirt was already soaked from the walk across the parking lot. The rubber of my work boots felt soft on the asphalt. "Cole Pritchard," I said, "here for the consolidation load." "You're late," Garrett said. Not hello, not thanks for coming, not I understand there was traffic, just you're late. Like that one fact erased everything else. Like one traffic incident negated every other thing I'd done right. "We had a multi-vehicle accident on I-15 at the Flamingo," I said, keeping my voice even and professional. "Jackknife incident. 3 vehicles involved. Emergency services response. I called your dispatcher Brenda at 7:32 this morning and gave her the updated ETA. The incident added approximately 3 hours to the timeline. That's documented in your dispatch system and covered under Section 7, subsection B of my contract, the force majeure provision." "I don't care about your dispatch system," Garrett said, and he was raising his voice now, making sure the warehouse staffers could hear him. "Performance for the room, establishing dominance in front of subordinates. You were supposed to be here at 10 a.m. It's almost 1 p.m. The casinos have prep teams waiting. You're costing us a critical morning window, and that's a problem. It's a big problem." I took a breath. This was a conversation I'd had before. Not with Garrett specifically, but with the type of person who'd never spent 3 hours sitting in a traffic jam with 2,000 other vehicles. Who didn't understand that sometimes weather and accidents happen in ways that nobody controls. And who believed that asserting authority was the same thing as understanding logistics. "The contract," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Section 7, subsection B covers exactly this scenario. Force majeure provisions. Traffic incidents, weather, emergency road closures. That's the language that covers me. That's why that language exists. You can check the contract. And here's where I made a tactical error. I actually pulled out my phone and I pulled up the contract to show him the clause. Section 7B, in black and white, spelled out in the legal language that both of us had supposedly agreed to. The thing is, pulling out a contract to quote it to someone in power, someone who's already decided they don't care about rules, tends to accelerate their resentment rather than resolve it. That was when Garrett's expression shifted from annoyed to something colder, something meaner. "I don't need a contract lecture from a truck driver," he said. His voice was louder now, and I could see the warehouse staffers actually looking away, uncomfortable, embarrassed for me, or embarrassed for him. "Load the truck. Now." "I need to inform you," I said, keeping my voice quiet and professional, because raising your voice only proves they got to you, that federal hours of service regulations require me to log a mandatory 30-minute break before I start any post-loading drive. I've been on duty since 5 a.m. That's 8 hours and 50 minutes as of right now. The regulation is non-negotiable. Federal regulation, not company policy. Federal law. I take that break or I violate federal law, which means federal penalties, which means my DOT certification is at risk. My livelihood is at risk. "Skip it," Garrett said, "or find another client." I felt something settle in me, the part of me that understood exactly what was happening, the part that had read the contract not just once but multiple times, because I take my work seriously. And I take the things I'm responsible for seriously. The part that knew the law because my livelihood depends on it. And the part that understood that I was being pushed toward a choice. Violate federal regulation or walk. And then he said it. "I don't need a contract lecture from a truck driver. You're just a driver. Know your place and load the damn truck before I find someone who will. You're just a driver." The words hung there in the heat between us. The warehouse staffers had completely stopped what they were doing. They were watching. One of them actually winced. I looked at Garrett for a long moment. I didn't get angry. I didn't get heated. I didn't feel my heart rate spike. Instead, something in me became very, very clear. I could see the whole board laid out. I could see the contract. I could see the law. I could see what he'd just done and what leverage he'd just given me. I said, "Understood," and I turned around and walked back to my truck. The cab was cool and quiet, a bubble of climate control in the middle of 114-degree desert heat. I climbed up into the driver's seat, closed the door, and I let the sound of the air conditioning be the only thing I heard for a long moment. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I was thinking very clearly about what had just happened, and what I was about to do, and what the consequences would be for everyone involved. This was the moment. This was where I stopped being a contractor who could be pushed around, and started being someone with leverage. Not because I'd become aggressive or hostile, but because I understood the system better than the person trying to dominate me. I picked up my phone and I called Ray Munoz. Ray's a trucking contract attorney in Las Vegas, been practicing for 21 years, and I'd retained him as a legal consultant back when I was starting the independent operation. We talk maybe twice a year for routine contract reviews. Today was going to be one of those times. Ray picked up on the third ring. "Cole, what's going on?" "I'm at the Novacrest yard in Henderson. I'm looking at the service agreement they have with me. Section 14, subsection C. I need to know if this is triggered." I could hear Ray opening files on his end, the sound of a keyboard, a practiced motion. "Go ahead." "The VP just told me I need to skip a mandatory federal HOS break or find another client. Then he told me I'm just a driver and that I need to know my place. That's a threat. That's demeaning language. I believe that triggers 14C. Am I correct?" Silence for maybe 2 seconds. Ray processing. Then clarity. Read it to me. I pulled up the contract on my phone, and I read the clause, word for word. If Novacrest personnel attempt to alter agreed payment terms on site, threaten or demean the contractor, or demand that the contractor violate federal regulations, the contractor may suspend service pending written resolution from Novacrest's legal department. Yeah, Ray said, that's triggered. That's completely and unambiguously triggered. There's no gray area here. He threatened you. He demanded you violate federal law, and he demeaned you. All 3 boxes are checked. What do you want to do? I want to suspend service. Okay, here's what you do. You don't load. You don't engage with them further. You log out of their dispatch system. You log out of your temperature monitoring system. That's the important part. You call their dispatcher and tell her you're suspending service per Section 14C. You don't answer any calls from Garrett or anyone else except logistics or legal. You sit tight, and you let their legal team come to you. What about the cargo? The cargo's fine. The refrigeration will keep running. It's the logging that matters. You're aware of that, right? The FDA cold chain compliance log. Yeah, I've got biometric linked monitoring. If I'm logged out of the system, the cooling keeps running but stops recording the log. Exactly, Ray said. And an unbroken temperature log is a federal requirement for resale to licensed food service operations. A gap in the log makes that entire cargo commercially unsellable to a casino property. It's documented as a break in chain of custody. That cargo becomes legally non-compliant for any regulated food service operation. They know this. Novacrest knows this. Their legal team will definitely know this. And once they understand that you're serious and that you understand the leverage, they'll come back to the table. I felt something settle even deeper, like dominoes finally clicking into place. Like I could see 3 moves ahead in a game where Garrett hadn't even realized we were playing. How long should I wait? Depends on how fast their legal team moves. Could be an hour, could be a couple of hours, but not too long, because every single minute that gap is open, they're losing more money. You're protected. You have a clear contract clause. You're not violating anything. You're exercising a contractual right that exists for exactly this situation. Sit tight. I'll keep my phone on. Okay. Cole, don't waver on this. They pushed hard because they think you'll back down. They think you'll cave. They think you're desperate. Don't prove them right. Don't waver. I won't. I hung up. I sat in the cab for a moment thinking about the contract, thinking about 19 years of doing this work with integrity, thinking about the $8,000 I'd paid for the temperature control system because I take cold chain seriously, thinking about a VP who'd never driven anything bigger than a BMW telling me I didn't matter, thinking about all the times I'd been respectful to people in power and how little that mattered if they decided to disrespect me first. I opened the Novacrest dispatch app on my dashboard. With one tap, I logged out. The app went dark. The connection terminated. Then I opened the temperature monitoring system, the FDA compliance logging system, and I logged out of that too. The refrigeration kept running. The system gave me the confirmation message. Cooling active, logging offline. I put the truck in park. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the thermos I'd filled up that morning. The coffee was still hot. Everything in my truck worked exactly as it was supposed to. The temperature gauge on the cargo area read 34.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Holding steady. Perfect. I called Brenda's dispatch line. Brenda picked up on the second ring. Novacrest dispatch. Brenda, this is Cole Pritchard. I need you to pass along a message to whoever needs to know at your organization. I'm suspending service effective immediately, pending written resolution from your legal department. I'm invoking Section 14, subsection C of my service agreement. I'll be waiting for contact from your legal team. There was a pause. I could hear her take a breath. "Cole, what happened? Did something go wrong at the yard?" "Your VP told me to violate federal regulations or find another client. Then he told me I'm just a driver and I need to know my place. That's a breach of contract." "That's demeaning. I'm invoking my contract rights. I'll be waiting for a call from legal." "Oh no," Brenda said, and she said it in a way that made me think she understood exactly what Garrett had done. The exhaustion in her voice. The recognition of what happens when someone in authority doesn't understand the people they depend on. "Okay, I'm logging this. Hang tight. I'm going to escalate immediately." I hung up. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. 1:17 p.m. Outside it was 114 degrees. The cargo, $84 million worth of perishables, months of planning, 3 casino opening nights, 3 major food service operations depending on this delivery, was sitting in an unloaded state in the yard, in brutal heat. But the cooling was running. The temperature inside that cargo area was holding at exactly 34.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And the clock on the temperature log gap had just started ticking. That was the moment. That was when the leverage shifted completely. I set my phone on the dashboard, screen up, and I waited. The first call came at 1:45 p.m. That was Marcus Chen, the logistics manager. I didn't answer. The phone rang, and I watched it ring, and it went to voicemail. I could imagine him trying to figure out where the truck was, why it wasn't loading. Marcus tried again at 1:52 p.m. Same thing, voicemail. At 2:03 p.m., Marcus knocked on the passenger side window of my cab. I rolled it down. "Cole, what's going on?" Marcus was younger, probably early 30s, and he looked genuinely stressed. His shirt had sweat stains. He'd probably been running around trying to figure out what the problem was. "The casinos are already reaching out. We need to get this loaded right now." "I'm suspending service," I said. "Section 14, subsection C of my contract. Your VP told me to violate federal hours of service regulations or find another client. Then he told me I'm just a driver and to know my place. That's a breach of contract. I need written resolution from your legal department before I can continue." Marcus's expression shifted, first to confusion, then to understanding. Then to something that looked like realization. He was the logistics guy. He dealt with the numbers every single day. He would know exactly what a temperature log gap meant for a high-value food shipment. "Oh," Marcus said quietly. "Okay, I'm going to go talk to legal." He walked back inside. At 2:15 p.m., my phone started lighting up with calls. Not from Novacrest, from the casinos. The restaurants had called Novacrest asking where their cargo was, and Novacrest had to tell them that the cargo was still at the distribution facility, held up in a dispute with the contractor. The phone rang. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. I watched the calls stack up in the log. Not my responsibility. Not yet. At 2:30 p.m., Garrett called. I let it ring. Then he called again, and again. The timestamp showed 2:31, 2:34, 2:36. I watched his desperation in the timestamps, each call representing a moment when he realized something was wrong, something he couldn't just order away, something that was getting worse by the minute. I could imagine him in his office, probably sweating, probably realizing that the situation had spiraled beyond his ability to control it with authority or volume. At 3 p.m., I found out later that Patricia Wynn, the CEO of Novacrest, was pulled out of a board meeting. She had never heard of Section 14C. Her legal team was scrambling through the contract database trying to find the exact language and figure out what leverage they'd just lost. What had just happened, what the exposure was. At 3:15 p.m., I got a call from Novacrest's attorney. Ray Munoz answered that one. I sat in the cab and I listened to Ray on speakerphone, explaining with the kind of patience you'd expect from someone who'd seen this exact play happen before. Your client VP created a hostile work environment, used demeaning language toward my client, and demanded that my client violate federal regulations. Mr. Pritchard invoked his contractual right to suspend service. The contract is clear. If you want to resume operations, you're going to need to issue a written apology and confirm that the original payment terms remain in effect, unchanged. That's the price of moving forward. The Novacrest attorney apparently tried to negotiate. Ray told him there was nothing to negotiate. The clause was either triggered or it wasn't. It was triggered. The facts supported the claim. The contract was unambiguous, and more importantly, they'd already started losing millions in penalties with every passing minute. At 3:30 p.m., I watched my phone register 13 missed calls from Garrett. The timestamps were between 2:30 and 3:28, one every few minutes. The first ones were probably angry. The later ones were probably frantic. The last ones were probably desperate. At 4 p.m., I'd received 63 missed calls total. 63. I wasn't counting them at the time. I was just watching the numbers accumulate. The screen was flashing with missed call notifications. Some from Garrett's direct number, some from Marcus, some from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably other logistics staff, probably the casinos trying to reach me directly, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I didn't answer any of them. The sun was still beating down on the rig. The heat outside was unforgiving. It probably pushed closer to 118 by that point in the afternoon. Inside my cab, I was in a cool 68 degrees, with cold water in the cooler I always keep, and I was reading through the contract again, line by line, making sure I understood every single clause, every single protection I had, every single word. The silence of the cab, the cool air, the clarity of the legal language. It all reinforced what I'd done. This wasn't panic. This wasn't desperation. This was the sound of a system working exactly as it was supposed to when you understood the rules. The cargo was fine. The cooling kept running. The interior of my rig was holding perfect temperature, perfect humidity, perfect conditions for perishable preservation. But there was no log of it, no documentation, no chain of custody, and that made the cargo unsellable. At 4:15 p.m., Ray called me directly. "They've got their legal team talking to their insurance carrier," he said. "They're understanding the exposure. The temperature log gap is a chain of custody break. That makes the cargo legally non-compliant for resale to regulated food service buyers. And the penalty clauses they've got with those casinos are substantial. We're talking multi-million-dollar exposure. They're coming back to the table. It won't be long now." "How long?" I asked. "Soon. Be patient. They're calculating their exposure. They're going to decide that apologizing is cheaper than fighting this." I was patient. At 4:47 p.m., an email arrived from Novacrest's legal department, addressed to me with Ray CC'd. "We sincerely apologize for the conduct of our VP of Operations toward you this afternoon. That conduct was inappropriate, unprofessional, and a breach of the professional standards we expect from our leadership team. We confirm that the original contracted payment terms remain in full effect and will not be reduced, modified, or disputed. We would appreciate the opportunity to continue with this delivery and look forward to resolving this matter promptly." It was sterile. It was corporate. It was exactly what I needed. I called Ray. "Got the email?" "Yep, that's your trigger. Log back in, load the truck, deliver the cargo, and we're done." I logged back into the dispatch system. The biometric signature linked to my security system verified my identity. The temperature monitor came back online. The log resumed recording. The system confirmed logging active at exactly 4:47 p.m. and 34.2 degrees Fahrenheit. I started the truck. The diesel engine turned over, smooth and familiar. It was 5:03 p.m. The cargo had been sitting in Henderson for 3 hours and 46 minutes, with a gap in its temperature log that now spanned from 1:17 p.m. to 4:47 p.m., a 3.5-hour break in chain of custody. The cooling had held perfectly. The contents were exactly as pristine as they'd been when I arrived, but the clock on the documentation problem was still running. The warehouse staffers loaded the truck in 45 minutes. They were professional. They knew what had happened. They knew what the gap meant. They knew what it meant for the casinos. They knew what it meant for their company. I pulled out of the Novacrest yard and began driving the consolidation route. The evening was clear and hot, the desert transitioning from yellow to gold as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. I had 3 delivery points to hit, and the first window was already closing. I pulled into the Paradise Resort kitchen entrance at 5:47 p.m. The receiving manager, a woman named Lisa, was standing by the dock. She'd been waiting. She knew about the delay. She knew about the late pickup. She knew about the documentation gap. "Temperature log?" she asked before I could even hand her the manifest. "I can pull it live," I said. I logged into the monitoring system and I showed her the data. Everything held from 4:47 p.m. until now. 34.2 degrees. Consistent. The prior gap is documented in my incident report. Lisa's expression didn't relax, but she nodded. She understood what that gap meant. She also understood that the cooling had held, which meant the cargo itself was intact. Physical integrity was one thing. Documentation integrity was another. "We're going to need to do a full manual inspection on every item," she said. "Our QA protocol. The gap in the automated log means we verify everything manually." "Understood," I said. I expected that, and they did. For the next 4 hours, Paradise Resort's QA team opened every package, every container, every sealed unit. They verified the produce for any signs of wilting or discoloration. They checked the dairy for spoilage, smelled it, checked the color, checked the texture. They inspected the proteins for any changes in color or appearance or firmness. They documented every single item in their system. By 9:47 p.m., they'd completed the inspection for Paradise Resort's allocation. Everything checked out. No spoilage, no damage, no loss of integrity. The cargo was perfect. But they'd still invoked a penalty clause with Novacrest for late delivery and the gap in documentation procedures. Not a full penalty because the cargo itself was fine, but significant. Thousands of dollars. I drove to the second property, the Venetian's new partner establishment. Same process. Manual inspection. 4 hours. QA team pulling every item, verifying, documenting. They were thorough. They were professional. But I could see the stress on their faces. Their opening night was the next day. These ingredients were supposed to be prepped. They were behind schedule. Completed at 1:23 a.m., April 25th. Another partial penalty clause invoked. Another few $1,000s in liability. The third property, Caesar's new fine dining partnership, received their allocation at 2:15 a.m. Same inspection protocol, same thorough verification, same professional process. Completed at 4:47 a.m., another partial penalty clause. By the time I was done, I'd been awake for 22 hours. The cargo had been successfully delivered to all 3 casino properties. The contents were intact. The menus would be prepared as scheduled for Friday night service at all 3 establishments. The opening nights would go off as planned, but the documentation gaps and late delivery penalty clauses that Novacrest had incurred across those 3 properties totaled approximately $11.2 million in liability. 1 company, 3 casinos, 1 moment of disrespect from a VP who didn't understand what he was dealing with. I drove back to my home address in Boulder City and I slept for 14 hours straight. I didn't dream. I didn't wake up. I just slept the sleep of someone who'd made a decision and executed it and wasn't going to second-guess himself. I didn't hear the news about Garrett until a week later. Brenda called me for a routine follow-up, asking about availability for a smaller load, A produce run to Reno that would take 8 hours total. Just a regular job. Something stable. Something that would keep the relationship going forward. By the way, Brenda said before I confirmed the Reno job, Garrett's gone. Terminated last Friday. Patricia, the CEO, apparently decided she didn't need someone in operations who didn't understand supply chain basics or how to treat contractors. Word is he's looking for work in logistics management at some smaller firm now. He won't be able to find much, though. The industry's small, and people talk. I'm not glad he's suffering, I said. That was true. I didn't hate him. He was just someone who didn't understand what he was dealing with, and he'd learned an expensive lesson. I know, Brenda said, but he should have treated you with respect. Yeah, I said, he should have. I took the Reno job. I took 3 more loads for Novacrest after that. Smaller ones, routine ones, the kind of work that keeps a small freight operation steady and profitable. Every driver, every dispatcher, every logistics manager I worked with after that was professional. They treated me like what I actually am. Someone who understands the regulations, who maintains the equipment, and who holds up his end of the contract without making excuses. Because here's what Garrett Holloway didn't understand, sitting in his glass office with his USC MBA and his expensive sneakers, directing a supply chain he'd never touched with his own hands or lived through in real time, never understanding the people who actually make the system function. The most powerful people in any supply chain are not the ones in the glass offices. They're not the ones with the titles or the degrees or the authority or the corner windows. They're the ones with their hands on the wheel. They're the ones whose names are on the DOT certifications. They're the ones who understand cold chain compliance and federal hours of service regulations and what happens when a temperature log gets a gap in it. They're the ones who've invested in their equipment and their training and their reputation. They're the ones who can't just walk away because they own the infrastructure. You can try to dismiss them. You can tell them to know their place. You can treat them like interchangeable parts in a machine you think you understand. But you don't get to do that for long. Not if they know their rights. Not if they know their value. Not if they actually understand the system well enough to invoke the protections that exist within it. Because the moment they do, the moment they stand firm, the entire dynamic changes. The power shifts, and suddenly the person who thought they had all the leverage realizes they don't. They realize they've been negotiating from weakness all along. Garrett Holloway said I was just a driver. He said it with contempt. He said it in front of witnesses, like it was an insult that should make me back down and comply. But being just a driver, in my case, meant I was protected by federal regulation and contractual language that he didn't know existed. It meant I had leverage. It meant when he pushed, he wasn't pushing against some tired, desperate contractor he could intimidate into compliance. He was pushing against someone who'd invested 2 decades in understanding exactly what his rights were, how to read a contract, and what the law actually says about safety and hours of service and food transportation. And once he did that, the outcome was inevitable. I got paid in full within 48 hours. No reduction, no dispute, no negotiation. The original contracted amount deposited in my account untouched. I cashed out, moved on, and never looked back. Garrett's severance package was probably larger than my annual revenue, and it still wasn't enough to teach him the lesson he needed to learn. Money alone doesn't teach you what you don't understand about power and systems and people. Some people get that lesson early in their careers and they change course. Some people get it late, after they've already made mistakes and after they've burned bridges. Some people never get it at all, and they go through their whole lives operating under the illusion that they understand the people they depend on, when in reality those people are just waiting for the moment they don't have to be dependent anymore. Garrett got it on an April afternoon in Nevada, sitting in an office full of phone calls he couldn't answer, watching $11.2 million in penalties cascade across his operation because a truck driver who was just a driver understood the contract better than he did and knew his rights well enough to exercise them. Sometimes that's all the revenge you need. Not revenge, actually. Justice. The simple outcome of knowing the law and knowing yourself and knowing what you're worth. Understanding that respect isn't something you earn by accepting disrespect. It's something you command by standing firm in the face of injustice. And if you understand the system, the real system, not the one people like Garrett think they control, you'll never have to beg for it again. You'll never have to accept being just a driver again. You'll know exactly what you are. The backbone of an industry that depends on you far more than it's willing to admit. You're the person they can't replicate or replace, not because you're irreplaceable as a human being, but because you've earned expertise and maintained standards that cost them millions when they're disrupted. And once you understand that fundamental truth, no amount of MBA degrees or expensive sneakers or inherited authority can change the equation.